I want to bring in my guest, a good friend of the show, Carl Jia. Carl Jia is host of Silk and Steel podcast focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and their politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jia. You can follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk In and subscribe and support the podcast at patreon.com, Silk and Steel, the man of the hour. What's going on, Carl? How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing good, Jamar. How are you?
I'm doing good. I have been fascinated by this drone stuff. Initially, I wasn't really paying that much attention to it. And then there seemed to be, I started paying attention when there was a discrepancy between what the federal government was saying versus what people on the ground were saying. And at the point where you have the Coast Guard saying, well, I was followed by 20 to 30 drones. And the federal government is like, oh, these are just, man-piloted vehicles. I was like, okay, you've piqued my interest. So, well, somebody is lying in this case, and I don't think it's the Coast Guard. But that's a secondary story. That's what's taking place here. That's one of the big news here in the States.
I like the initial story when they say it was drones launched for an Iranian mothership.
The mothership connection. Well, yeah. I mean, look, man, we have a lot of paranoid people in the States. And the idea is like, yeah, there's a Iranian mothership on that coast that are launching drones.
It's a military base. It's near a U.S. military base. The government don't want you to know about it. I mean, it's probably they're testing some secret weapon platform. This is why UFO only visit United States, Jamar. But anyway, so let's.
I gotta be honest. I don't know. I mean, in the very beginning, look, my first thought is the government is doing something that they don't want to tell. I just don't know what that something is. And, you would think that they need to get their story straight if they're gonna, because it feels like they fell into this ass backwards. Like, meaning they hit this after the public was screaming about it, after the public was freaking out because they kept showing images and, video images, one video after the next of all of these things flying in Jersey. And then when they started visiting military bases, okay, well, now we have a different conversation. Like, it's very strange. That's all. It's just very, very strange. KJ, I brought you on because I saw the story about, I think the name is Li Jinping. You can correct me on the pronunciation. But he apparently was caught embezzling $412 million. And whereas in the United States, that's just called good business, a good capitalist. In China, that's called illegal. And he was executed by the state, which is, again, for the US, that is astonishing because corruption is as American as apple pie. And every random blue moon, you get one of these kind of one percenters. But for all intents and purposes, most of the people you're executing are just poor people who might stick up a store and take a few bucks. And because it's a stick up and it's a robbery, that counts as kind of a murder charge. In this case, this was pure embezzlement. And this is the way China effectively deals with corruption. It's don't do this. There will be consequences. Give me your take on this. What is your thoughts on this?
Well, I had to do a double take because normally for corruption, you see a lot of people daily news about corrupt official gets sentenced to death. You see that a lot, but a lot of time if you read the fine print, read the detail, they say they get sentenced to death with a suspended death sentence with 2 years reprieve. What normally happens in those cases is after 2 years, if they are on good behavior in prison, the sentence get commuted to life imprisonment. That's what normally happens. So I had to take a double take when I saw, no, they didn't sentence him. They executed him. So I have to dig in a little deeper to see what happened. So his corruption case is one of the biggest corruption case that has uncovered in recent history. It's $400 million. It's not a small sum of money, and he's not even a big honcho. He's like he was in charge of developing the special economic zone in the capital of Inner Mongolia. So basically, he's in collusion with the real estate developers, and and there's a lot of corruption. But I think when I look at his sentencing a little deeper, he was in fact sentenced to death with 2 years reprieve. Which would mean normally he would serve his 2 years, and the sentence will get commuted to life imprisonment. But he got another sentence thrown at him, which is collusion with a crime syndicate. And it's that additional charge in combination with the corruption that got him. There was no reprieve. There was, like, they combined the sentences. It just became suspended death sentence to like real death sentence. And this is why he got executed.
It's a real death sentence.
So he's probably, I'm guessing he's probably in cahoots with some mafia bosses breaking somebody's legs. So that's a little bit more serious than just taking money on the down low. So this is why he's it's actually pretty exceptional in China when the execution do get carried out. Because what normally happened is the sentence get commuted to lifetime in prison, and then most of the corrupt officials, they get just rot in jail for the rest of their life. But this guy, I think it's a mafia connection that really got him. But even that is kind of normal in the United States, right? I mean, people like that get to elected, Speaker of the House. But
it's called good capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of people in US commenting on X. They're posting that Gordon Patterson meme where he says, "Oh Lord Jesus, I see what you've done for other people. Can you please do that for me?"
Oh, because you must understand, like, look, I put it to you this way. Corruption is so endemic in the US, and the public feels like the government doesn't have their back, that the government is effectively working for the side with the most cash, with the most capital. And so for us, we have become so accustomed to the just raw, unadulterated corruption that is just like suffocating. Like Nancy Pelosi, for example, doing stocks while in Congress is just grotesque. And yet it's part of the fabric of the way we operate. These corporations and everything else, there's a sense that the American public is not, the American government is not working in the interest of the American public, that is working in the interest of the people who are paying them. And those people are absolutely right. And so when we see something like this happen, you get a segment of the population that applauds. Like, honestly, like the CEO that just got whacked for the United Healthcare, the majority of the population approves a murder. Like they're like, I mean, you even got to the point where people are like, "Oh, he's so sexy. We need to forgive. Forgiveness is divine. We need to let him go." I mean, Ted Raw was on the show, and so it was like, if I'm on that jury, that man walks. Like, that's where we are. So you can understand, right, where the majority of the American public looks at that case and say, clean murder. Well, when they look at China and they're actually doing something about corruption, well, you don't have to go to a person taking it upon their hands to be a vigilante. Where Chinese government is like, no, we don't tolerate corruption. Full stop. You will get
Jamar, this is why superhero is popular in US, because we know we cannot count on our government to do the job. So we need vigilantes. We need vigilante to deal justice.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it kind of boils down to, right? Like, there is a difference between China executing somebody for just grotesque corruption and Luigi killing the guy on his own. And I guess the difference is a process of state. One is the country coming together saying corruption is intolerable, and we will take a legal solution to deal with corruption and give a warning to anybody else that's coming behind them that's going to do it, as opposed to the government is not going to do anything about this. The government codifies this, meaning there's no political solution to the issue of the way insurance companies deny care and maximize their profits. And so you get a vigilante that takes it into his own hands. And so it's like, yeah, both people got killed, but there's a difference between a government process that is making a decision based on due diligence and law versus laws that protect these people for fleecing the population, where the population has to take it upon their own self to do it. It's just fascinating.
Jamar, we don't have corruption in the United States. We have transparency. It's called lobbying and campaign financing.
Right.
It's all above the table, Jamar.
Right.
We have transparency.
It's like you get to know who's buying your politicians. Isn't that a positive thing? That's called democracy. I mean, hell, we even went so far as to say
we can see the price tag of the politicians who got bought by APAC.
Yeah.
We can see how much they're getting paid. And we have politicians like Richie Torres, who's really working for cheap. You know, why are you showing for Israel so hard? They're not even giving you that much money.
$100 million. They spent $100 million just in the primaries alone. It's grotesque. I mean, and then to make this argument that money equals speech. And so the person with the most money can yell the loudest. And it's like, okay, that's not democracy. That's something else. Like that's what I mean when I said this kind of oligarchical system that has been instantiated with laws to protect the system in place.
We have an oligarchy that runs elections in US, Jamar.
Yes.
We have that for a long time now.
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, I guess my point is when we see something like this, you will get a segment of the population that applauds the fact that China is being aggressive on this issue of corruption. I mean, I remember the last case where you pointed out, it was like, yeah, but that guy's most likely going to be commuted. And I didn't understand how he could get further charges while in jail. Because I think they said something like execution pending X amount of time.
Right. So what happened is that all the sentences happened together. So for the corruption and taking bribes, that he got the charge of a death sentence with 2 years reprieve. But then he got another sentence of colluding with criminal syndicate, and then they combined the two sentences.
I see. So that charge took place before he was convicted of the second okay. So he got convicted first, but they merged the two charges together.
Yes. That's what happened.
I see. Yeah. I see. Yeah. Wow. Just fascinating. The differences in the systems and what they allow versus what they don't allow. Carl, I'm curious on something. What is China's response to Syria collapsing?
So this is interesting because throughout the 13 years of Syrian war, China mostly stayed in the background. They let Russia took the charge front and center during the military intervention in 2015, supporting the Assad government throughout until 2020 when the conflict was frozen. And also Iran provided a lot of material support for the Assad government as well. Whereas China was more playing the role of the economic backer. It was providing economic aid to the Assad government and providing diplomatic assistance in the UN when China used its China rarely uses veto power in the Security Council, but in case of Syria, China had used it like 6-7 times, but then again, China traditionally have a non-interference foreign policy. China do not send its troops abroad like the way Russia does. China do not send its expeditionary force all the way to Middle East. Like people kind of expect China would behave like the United States, but that's not how China functions. So now the two players who are directly backing Assad government, Russia and Iran, they basically have kind of throw in the towel because the government collapsed so quick. Everything took place basically within 10 days. By the time they had the Doha meeting between Russia, Turkey, and Iran, it was already too late. The jihadi rebels are already in Damascus. So at this point, there's not much China could do. And what China would like, though, is China will probably wait to see how things develop. Because what China will do is China will always do business with a government that's internationally recognized. Currently, Syria do not have an internationally recognized government anymore. Assad's government was internationally recognized. It has UN representation, but now it's kind of wide open question. I mean, it looks like what's going to happen is U.S. and NATO countries are working really hard to rebranded Al Qaeda and present them as a legitimate government for the new Syria. And so we're going to have to see what happened on that and whether they're going to lift the sanctions. Because first of all, U.S. still have the Caesar Act, which Trump during his first term signed in, designed to strangle the Syrian economy to cause this regime collapse. And essentially that's what happened. What we witnessed is U.S. sanction actually work in this case, because people on the ground in Syria, the Syrian Arab Army, their officers were getting paid like $30 a month, and their recruits were getting paid $7 a month. Those are like survival wages, barely subsistence wages. So that's why some of them were prone to be bought off, for example, by money from the Gulf countries, because we have reports of many of these soldiers. They while they're fighting, they suddenly receive an order to withdraw and pull back. And we saw that in Aleppo when the Syrian Arab Army pulled back without a fight, and in Hama they put out a fight for a couple of days, and then with a certain order to withdraw. We don't exactly know where the order come from, but we have reports of the Syrian Arab Army general in contact with so-called intermediaries in UAE. So my guess is money exchanged hands. People got bought off, and there's not much China could do at this point. But China do have some interest in Syria because right now one of the rebel force that was like the spearhead for the push to Damascus is the Turkestan Islamic Party, which is composed of mostly Uyghurs from China. And so from the time period from 2012 to 2015, this was when this is the timeline that Seymour Hersh reported on, when U.S., Turkey, NATO, they ran rat line to send all the jihadis from Libya and also from Europe to Syria to topple Assad. But there's another rat line that goes to send these Uyghurs to Syria. This was actually reported by Associated Press back in 2018. So what happened was these Uyghurs were leaving China, and they go, but the Chinese border around Central Asia in Xinjiang was locked down. But the Chinese border in the south with Southeast Asia was relatively porous because it has been peaceful. But the Uyghurs, being Chinese citizens, they can travel anywhere in the country. So they will take a train to take a high-speed train from Xinjiang to southwest China. In a couple of hours, will arrive at the border in the southwest, where the border is relatively porous with Myanmar, with Laos, Vietnam, etc. If you dig in reports around 2012, 2014, at that time period, you will see reports of U.S. diplomatic battles with China on what to do with these detained Uyghurs who were caught crossing border illegally into Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and even Indonesia. And United States urged these countries not to repatriate these Uyghurs back to China, where U.S. said they will face persecution. Instead, any Uyghurs who made their way to Malaysia, to the Malaysian capital, Kuala Lumpur, when they go to the Turkish consulate, Turkish embassy, they're provided with quote-unquote fake Turkish passport, which allow them to board a plane from Malaysia to fly to Turkey. And as soon as they step off the airplane at the Istanbul airport, their quote-unquote fake Turkish passport get taken away, and they're met with jihadi recruiters who sent them straight to Syria. And this is how thousands of Uyghur fighters have been holed up in Idlib. And there are various reports on the numbers. And most of the report estimate is about 5,000 fighters, but together with their family, maybe 20,000 Uyghurs. I saw and I saw their propaganda videos very recently of these Uyghur fighters returning to Idlib. They're welcomed by their large family. So I mean, it's plausible. 5,000 fighters plus their family, 20,000 Uyghur total is quite possible. So this is present a problem. This is also going to be a problem with whatever new Syrian government in the relationship with China, because Jolani, the new ruler of Damascus, have just announced that they're thinking about granting citizenship to all the foreign fighters who fought for New Syria, and they said that. They say they're thinking about granting Syrian citizenship to anyone who lived in Syria for 5 years. So that will include these Uyghur fighters who help the rebranded Al-Qaeda's push into Damascus, because the Turkish Islamic Party is affiliated with Al-Qaeda. There are Al-Qaeda branch. In fact, the Turkish Islamic Party's head was sitting on Al-Qaeda's high Shura Council. So these are well known to United States, but they pretend not to understand. In fact, Pompeo, before he stepped down during the first Trump term, what he did was he took the Turkestan Islamic Party off the terrorist list. so there's that issue that China and whatever new government in Syria will have to contend with. And then it's also the matter of international recognition. China will not do business with any government that's not being recognized internationally. But there are exceptions. Taliban, Taliban is probably the closest. It's the only exception that I think of, but that's because Afghanistan is a neighbor, and Taliban, they are the government in Afghanistan, so China have to deal with them. But Syria is a quite different matter, because Syria is not a neighbor, and I think China is just waiting to see how the fallout of the collapse of the Syrian government is going to turn out.
One of the interesting things about the Uyghurs, they're saying that they're going to go back to China now that they've gotten all of this battle experience, that they've been fighting, and that they've liberated, quote unquote, Syria, that China is next. For all of those people who were talking about this genocide of the Uyghurs, and China was making this argument like, look, these people have been radicalized, and we have to do something to deprogram the people who are radicals in this country. And this was the way they went about trying to deal with that. Like, if you had somebody in America, for example, let's say like Nazis, and you needed to somehow get those people to not be Nazis, how do you do that? You can kill them. Okay, but let's say you don't want to kill your own citizenry. So what do you do? That's the issue, right? We put people in prison all the time for committing crimes, and those prisons are horrible locations. Now, I don't necessarily know what the Uyghurs are living in, but everything that I've heard.
You know what the European country's solution for de-radicalization is? They sent them to Syria and Iraq to join ISIS. I mean, all these European bodies, all of them have been under surveillance by MI6 and other European intelligence agency for years. This comes out after like a terrorist attack in Europe, for example. Then they realize, oh, these guys have been on watch list for years. Mm-hmm. And these guys, so they just allow them. I mean, I don't think it's more. I think it's more than turning a blind eye, because they're actually actively sending jihadis, for example, from Libya to Syria. I mean, they are, if anything, they will probably facilitated these guys travel to Syria and.
I don't doubt it. I mean, Giuliani still has a $10 million bounty on his head by the U.S. And so it's like, and I remember somebody asked, so what? They don't know where he is as he's overthrowing the government of Syria? It's like, certainly they're aware of where he is, what he's doing, and more likely than not, an asset of the U.S. Turkish, proxy war on Syria. So no, I don't disagree with you on that. I guess my thing is, let me ask it this way: what are the conditions that the Uyghurs are in China? I don't believe for a moment it's a genocide, so I don't buy that.
So
I
yeah,
suspect it's a
that giant
reorientation camp.
genocide is a hoax. I mean,
Yeah,
people can see what's happening in Gaza. That's a
yeah,
genocide. I mean,
right,
where are the videos of China bombing cities in Xinjiang? Where are the videos of refugee camps around China's borders? Like it's because that's what happens in a genocide. You're gonna see
right,
massive refugees flooding everywhere. You're gonna see you're gonna. This is 2024. You're gonna
hmm,
have videos leaking out no matter what. What happened was China went through this de-radicalization program for the radicalized Uyghurs, and
right,
by 2019, Chinese government actually announced they have closed down all the de-radicalization camps. Nobody's in camps anymore.
hmm,
And this was reported by New York Times, Washington Post, but they cast their skepticism. They're like, oh well, allegedly Chinese government said that, but they in every other media, there people still talking like they're still talking about millions of Uyghurs being genocided in the concentration
right,
camps. Today, life in Xinjiang is returning to normal because
hmm,
China had probably one of the most successful de-radicalization programs. The initially they did have de-radicalization camps. The goal was always to return these people to society. It's not
right,
to like quarantine. It's not just to quarantine them and to let them rot in jail. It's to de-radicalize them, but also to train them, give them job skills, so when they come out, they can be productive citizens. And this is where the U.S. sanctions kicks in, and that's when U.S. have now sanctioning on any product that's coming in Xinjiang that employs any Uyghur labor, because they're claiming
right,
any Uyghurs working in China is a slave labor, is a slave.
right,
So we cannot have slave labor. So that's why the U.S. custom is investing a lot of money to investigate whether textile are using Xinjiang cotton, for example.
hmm,
They're trying to pressure all the Western companies to close down their supply chain, to move their supply chain away from Xinjiang. And it's used as an excuse to sanction Chinese-made solar products, because a lot of Chinese-made solar panels, they're made in Xinjiang, because Xinjiang has big desert, has a lot of sand, and
yeah,
but it's all that this all shaped up to the U.S. sanction on China later. I mean, first it was they used as an excuse to like for the human rights ground. They claim China is using slave labor. China is
hmm,
claiming that U.S. is claiming that China is using slave labor to pick cotton in Xinjiang because they because this is like 100% projection, right? I mean, like because U.S. its own history with slaves working the cotton field,
yes,
and even today, U.S. prison system
that's
is
right.
is a large slave labor camp, and in
Excuse
fact,
me, Carl. I hate to
go
interrupt
ahead.
this, but it's 8 cent to slave labor. I think they pay them like 8 cent an hour or something like that. I'm sorry. I just wanted to correct that. That is 8 cent away from slavery.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah,
So this is a lot of projection, but people
yeah.
buy it because people know about U.S. They know all these kind of shitty thing that happened in U.S. history, and then they just say, oh yeah, it's also happening in China because China bad, of course.
Uh-huh.
This is how the info war, propaganda war works, is to convince people there's really no alternative to the U.S. system. U.S. system may be bad, but China is even worse. Don't think there's an alternative to what you got. What we have is the best we can do for you guys.
That's
And
the
so in other words, right now there's so many. China is open, by the way. If you have a valid Chinese visa, you can visit Xinjiang region. You don't need a special permit to travel to
hmm,
Xinjiang. So now if you go to YouTube, you actually see a lot of vloggers who are now traveling to Xinjiang, documenting what they see, and not just Western vloggers. You have vloggers from the Arab world, from Southeast Asia. You have Indonesian Muslims traveling to Xinjiang. You have Indian vloggers traveling to Xinjiang. You can find everything on YouTube, and this is why they even try to shut down that avenue of information. Now you have mainstream media saying, "Oh, these vloggers, they're all just helping propagating, pushing communist propaganda." And this is also why United States, uh, for some time, they slapped China with a level 3 warning on travel, placing China on the same level as Ethiopia, a country that's
Oh,
in
wow.
active civil war, right?
Yeah.
Recently they quietly dialed down to travel, like there's a warning to level 2, but it's still kind of ridiculous. China is one of the most safest country to travel to, and as I mentioned, there's no restriction on traveler going to Xinjiang. So all you need is a Chinese visa, and China made coming to China very easy in 2024. So for most of the European countries, EU countries, now they get 30 days visa-free travel to China.
Wow.
But for Americans and British, for people in UK who don't get that visa-free travel, now there's a 10-day transit, visa-free transit travel. So if you are flying to China and then go to a third country, you get to stay in China 10 days visa-free. And previously it was only restricted to one city that you could visit, but now they took out away the restrictions, so you can travel freely within China for those 10 days, provided you are leaving at the end of the 10 days to another third country. And so this is, so people can go see for themselves what's going on in Xinjiang. If you really want to know, if people really dying to know what's happening in Uyghur in Xinjiang, buy a ticket, go to Xinjiang, see it for yourself, because seeing is believing.
That reminds me of the guy who was flat earther, and they were running free tests, not tests, but they were running free trips to the Antarctica so they can see, basically, like, dude, if you're right, the sun is not going to do what it's doing here. And every so often you get somebody who the wool fall from their eyes. They're like, oh my God, I was wrong all of these years about there being a flat earth. Well, that is, the flat earth thing is kind of the bottom of the barrel to me, but it puts me in mind of something similar where you can go, you can see it for yourself and see what it is. Also, we've lost a huge amount of credibility on this notion of genocide, considering what we're allowing in Israel. How did they go about re-educating it? Because I had the same question for like Nazis, or if we're talking about, let's say, in Afghanistan or some of the Wahhabi schools. How would they go about rehabilitating or re-educating?
So first of all, it is compulsory. They had to go. It was not. They weren't giving a choice. Okay, so that there was compulsory feature of it. But when they go to the deradicalization camp, they are mostly importantly they're giving job training. And because China, the Chinese government, they function from like the kind of the Marxist understanding of how everything is based on economics, right? So China is the economy, stupid, right?
Yeah.
And so they focus on, they think that it's because the poverty that breeds terrorism and radicalization.
I
So
agree.
their solution is to give people jobs, to give people training, so they will have jobs, and by economically developing the region, so to remove the soil for radicalization and terrorism. So that's one aspect, and the other aspect is through education, because there was a lot of there were many issues in Xinjiang before. One of the issue was because kind of especially a lot of these jihadist elements were coming back from Afghanistan after
Right.
the Soviet withdrawal. Some Uyghurs traveled to Pakistan, and then they ended up in all these religious madrasas where they got radicalized, and then they went to Afghanistan to fight the Soviet, and some of these Uyghur Mujahideens came back in the 90s in Xinjiang, where they tried to spread their extremist ideology. And so the education part is to counter that, the radicalization part. So one part education, one part job training, and this whole de-radicalization program lasted about 1 year or a year and a half time. And so at the end, the people are the government provided them with jobs. The people who were trained in this de-radicalization in camps, when they came out, when they acquired the skill, they were given jobs. And this is where what the U.S. is saying, slave labor. They say, okay, this cannot be voluntary because it's government assigned, so there's state coercion, so there must be slave labor. One of the reasons the government has helped them assign to get jobs is because, rather than they have to face the job competition in a free market scenario where people might not be comfortable hiring people who came straight out of the radicalization program, and this is why the Chinese government was working with the companies, private companies, giving them tax incentive to hire these Uyghurs who came out of the de-radicalization camps. This is what's labeled as slave labor practice by the U.S. State Department. Again, the sanction serves one goal. The sanction is just like the sanction on Syria. It was designed to collapse the Syrian economy. The sanction on Xinjiang and all the products made in Xinjiang is so those Uyghurs would not have jobs. So they will be stuck in poverty. So there will be discontent. Then there will be rise up and demanding regime change. That's the logic of sanction. But luckily China has large enough internal market, domestic market, that it can absorb all the products produced by Xinjiang without, unlike the case of Syria, where the economy was seriously affected by the Caesar Act.
Well, I'm curious that I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they pointed out that Russia, or for that matter, I would imagine, by extension, China, could have flooded the Syrian market in order to deal with some of the vagaries of the sanctions that were being applied. Do you know if Russia and Syria had any kind of trade relationship, especially with the sanctions being in effect?
Right. I mean, the thing with Russia is they're dealing a problem with their own, which is Ukraine war. And Russia
Right.
economy itself is under heavy sanction by the
Right.
West. And Russia, one way Russian economy was sustained is through its normal trading relationship with China, which China kept the relationship as is, despite pressure from United States. United States time again had pressured China to cut off any trading ties with Russia, but China did not comply because China do not want to see Russia fail. Now, however, so Russia do not have the wherewithal to economically sustain Syria because they're more focused in the home front, whereas China, they have to walk a very delicate balance because the U.S. sanctions, they're not just like sanctioning U.S. companies. It's a global sanction. The logic of U.S. sanction is if you use any kind of U.S. product, if you use U.S. dollars in transaction, then you are liable to be sanctioned because U.S. dollars, that's our property. You are U.S. dollars, then we can sanction you. And this is why a lot of the Chinese companies, especially private companies, they're a lot more hesitant to invest in places that has U.S. sanction because they might have business, they might have customers in the West, they might have U.S. customers, or they might have customers in Europe or Japan that could be cut off by the U.S. sanctions. So Um, so yeah, so China. I mean, I know people say China could do more, but it's really the U.S. sanction is all encompassing and it's very suffocating. The way it's applied to China, for example, the U.S. sanction is not they're not just preventing U.S. companies from selling chips to China, for example. It's also preventing Japanese companies, Korean companies, Taiwanese companies, Dutch companies from selling to China because they say, okay, you guys use US software, you guys use US equipment, then you cannot sell to China. So this is how they the same level of sanction was applied to Syria. I mean, it's like this is why I mean I guess China, in the hindsight, China could do more, but the reason China there was not more Chinese investment into Syria is because of the sanctions.
No, I can understand that. I mean, it's amazing to me that the US has that much clout where they can literally intrude into the foreign, or let's say sovereign affairs of nations in regards to who wants to help who because they're concerned about the sanctions being applied to themselves and their own products and their own thing. And we saw this with the JCPOA. If you remember when Europe was supposed to basically be the guarantors of the deal of the JCPOA, Trump pulls out, and then you get all of these other European companies pulling out because Europe couldn't support the economic output of the US.
Remember, at that time, Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, she said, you know what, Trump has been a bad faith actor. We are going to follow through. Europeans, we are going to follow through. We're going to keep our end of the deal. But all the German executives said, no, we're out. We're out. We don't want to be sanctioned by United States. Sorry. I mean, they are like Angela Merkel don't even have the power to tell the German company what to do because this German executives are so scared of the sanction by US. They're like, you know what? We're out. We're going to abide by the U.S. sanctions because we don't want to be sanctioned ourselves.
It's just sovereignty, just completely out the window. Carl, man, thank you for this. Carl, I always enjoy these conversations. I was super curious about how, because I didn't hear much in the news about the relationship between China and Syria. It was always talked about and discussed from the standpoint of Iran, Russia, and Syria, not necessarily China. It's almost like China was behind the scenes. In regards to any kind of, anything that was going on. They weren't necessarily in the forefront. So thank you for this. I appreciate it. Carl Jha, he is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk In, and you can subscribe and support the podcast at patreon.com/Silk and Steel. Man, thank you for this, Carl. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamar.
All right. We have come to the end of the show.